Clint Eastwood secretly buried two men in his film, and nobody noticed for years. Not literally buried them, but he hid their names in the dirt of a Western cemetery, carved into stone, visible on screen for anyone sharp enough to look. Two names, two men he loved, two men he'd just lost. And for years, almost nobody knew why. To understand the secret, you have to go back to 1964. Clint Eastwood was 34 years old, a TV cowboy going nowhere fast, doing 6 seasons on Rawhide. He was making a living, but nobody in Hollywood took him seriously as a film actor. He was good-looking and tall and could ride a horse, but so could 100 other guys. Then an Italian director named Sergio Leone called. Leone wanted Clint for a low-budget spaghetti western being shot in Spain, a remake of a Japanese film. Clint's agent said to do it as a favor to the William Morris office in Rome. Clint almost said no. He was tired. He wanted a few days off. He'd already been playing a cowboy on TV. Clint Eastwood secretly buried two men in his film, and nobody noticed for years. Not literally buried them, but he hid their names in the dirt of a Western cemetery, carved into stone, visible on screen for anyone sharp enough to look. Two names, two men he loved, two men he'd just lost. And for years, almost nobody knew why. To understand the secret, you have to go back to 1964. Clint Eastwood was 34 years old, a TV cowboy going nowhere fast, doing 6 seasons on Rawhide. He was making a living, but nobody in Hollywood took him seriously as a film actor. He was good-looking and tall and could ride a horse, but so could 100 other guys. Then an Italian director named Sergio Leone called. Leone wanted Clint for a low-budget spaghetti western being shot in Spain, a remake of a Japanese film. Clint's agent said to do it as a favor to the William Morris office in Rome. Clint almost said no. He was tired. He wanted a few days off. He'd already been playing a cowboy on TV for years. But he read the script, and something clicked. He flew to Spain for $15,000, brought his own cigars, which he found at a tobacco shop in Beverly Hills, then chopped into thirds because they were too long. Leone spoke almost no English. Clint spoke 0 Italian. They communicated through gestures and translators. But they understood each other completely. Leone knew exactly what he wanted from Clint: a face, a posture, a stillness that spoke louder than any dialogue. Where Italian actors waved their arms and emoted broadly, Clint stood still, did nothing, and somehow that nothing was everything. A Fistful of Dollars opened in Italy in 1964. It changed the world. Clint Eastwood became an international star almost overnight. The man with no name, the poncho, the squint, the economy of violence. 3 films with Leone: A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Clint was untouchable. He'd gone from TV cowboy to global icon because of Leone. But Leone didn't like being thanked for it. He had his own ego, his own certainty. He believed he'd created the persona, not discovered it. And maybe he was right. Maybe both things were true. Their relationship was complicated by the late 1960s. When Leone started Once Upon a Time in the West, he offered Clint the lead. Clint passed. Leone cast Henry Fonda and Charles Bronson instead. He was furious. They never worked together again. Years passed, then decades. The man with no name rode into film history, but the men who made him stood apart. Then the second mentor entered. Don Siegel had been making films since the 1940s, a craftsman, a professional. He directed Invasion of the Body Snatchers in 1956. He directed The Killers in 1964 with Lee Marvin. He was not famous like Leone, but he was respected. He understood efficiency, economy, how to tell a story without wasting a single frame. He directed Clint in 5 films: Coogan's Bluff, 2 Mules for Sister Sarah, The Beguiled, Dirty Harry, and Escape from Alcatraz. 5 films across 10 years, and he taught Clint everything. How to direct,
how to run a set, how to trust your instincts and move fast, how not to overthink it, not cover every angle with 17 takes, but trust the first instinct, because the first instinct is usually right. Don Siegel was the reason Clint became a director, not just an actor, a filmmaker. They were so close that Siegel took a small role in Clint's first film as director, Play Misty for Me. Just a cameo, a bartender, but it mattered. It was Siegel saying, "I believe in you, you can do this." And Clint could. By the 1980s, Clint had directed more than a dozen films. He was as respected behind the camera as in front of it. He had his own production company, Malpaso, named after a creek near his home in Carmel. He was independent, powerful, his own man.
But Leone and Siegel were always there, the two men who had made him, the Italian and the American, the operatic and the economical. Between them, they contained almost everything Clint had become. Then, in 1985, a screenplay landed on Clint's desk. It was called The William Money Killings, written by David Webb Peoples, who would later co-write Blade Runner. The story of an aging, broken outlaw trying to live clean on a Kansas pig farm, forced by poverty to take one last job, forced back into the violence he'd tried to escape. Clint read it in one sitting. He loved it immediately. He said it was gorgeous, said it was the only Western he'd read since The Outlaw Josie Wales that genuinely moved him. But he was 55 years old, still vital, still strong. The role needed an old man, actually old, physically worn down by time, haunted by decades of regret. Not a man performing age, a man who was aged. So Clint did something extraordinary. He put the screenplay in a drawer, and he waited. He would wait 10 years. During those years, Don Siegel got sick. He'd been diagnosed with cancer, and by 1991 he was dying. He died on April 20th, 1991, at 78 years old, in Nipomo, California. He was buried near Highway 1 in the coastal Cayucos Morro Bay District Cemetery. Clint was devastated. He'd lost his most important teacher. Sergio Leone had already been gone 2 years. Leone died suddenly in 1989 at 60 years old, a cerebral hemorrhage in the middle of the night. He'd been preparing to make Leningrad, a massive film about the World War II siege. It never got made. He was gone, just like that. 2 years apart, both of them dead. The Italian who turned Clint into an icon, the American who turned Clint into a filmmaker. Clint was 60 years old when Siegel died. He opened the drawer. He read The William Money Killings again. Read it the way a different man reads it, a man who understood loss now, who understood what it meant to have buried the people who made you. The script hit differently. William Money's grief, his guilt, his exhaustion, it all made sense in a way it couldn't have when Clint was 55 and his mentors were still alive. He was ready, finally, genuinely ready. He changed the title. The William Money Killings became Unforgiven. He shot it in Alberta, Canada in the summer of 1992. 39 days, his usual efficiency. Gene Hackman, Morgan Freeman, Richard Harris. And while he was making it, he decided to do something private, something that most of the crew wouldn't notice, most of the audience wouldn't catch, most of the critics wouldn't mention. He hid his mentors in the film. In the opening sequence of Unforgiven, there's a cemetery on the edge of the fictional town of Big Whiskey. Just a few wooden crosses and stone markers in the dirt. The kind of cemetery you'd pass without looking at twice. Clint had names carved into 2 of those tombstones. S. Leone, Donald Siegel.
Right there, in the dirt of a Western cemetery, hidden in plain sight, visible to anyone who paused the film and looked closely, but easy to miss if you weren't watching for it, because they're just tombstones, just background, just the kind of detail a Western needs to feel authentic. Nobody noticed for years. Not the critics who reviewed the film in 1992, not the audiences who made it #1 at the box office for 3 consecutive weeks, not even most of the film's admirers who watched it repeatedly, who studied its cinematography and dissected its themes. 2 names in stone, 2 dead men, 2 mentors, hidden in the background of the film they'd made possible. When Clint was finally asked about it years later on Inside the Actors Studio in 2003, he was casual about it, almost amused. "I was having a little fun with those guys," he said. "I wasn't wishing anything upon them." He said you had to put some name on the tombstones. They couldn't be blank, so he put their names on them. But that's the modest version, the version that deflects from the emotion of it. Think about what he actually did. He waited 10 years to make a film. He waited until the 2 men most responsible for his career were dead. He shot the film in the year after both of them were gone, and then he carved their names into the ground of his final Western. Not just in the dedication, though the dedication exists too. The final credit of Unforgiven reads, "Dedicated to Sergio and Don." But the dedication is visible, obvious. Anyone watching the credits sees it. The tombstones are different. The tombstones are a private conversation with men who couldn't hear it anymore. A gesture buried in dirt and stone, placed where they'd always belonged in his story, at the foundation, literally beneath the ground his characters walk on. The Western that Clint made because of them, set in the landscape they helped create. And somewhere in that landscape, their names are in the ground. S. Leone, Donald Siegel. When Unforgiven was released in August 1992, the response was overwhelming. Critics immediately called it a masterpiece. Roger Ebert said it was Eastwood's best film. Jack Matthews called it the finest classical Western since John Ford's The Searchers. Time magazine put it in the year's top 10. It opened at #1, made $15 million its first weekend, the biggest opening Clint had ever had, stayed #1 for 3 weeks, eventually grossed $159 million on a $14 million budget. At the Academy Awards, it was nominated for 9 Oscars. It won 4. Best Picture, Best Director for Clint, Best Supporting Actor for Gene Hackman, Best Film Editing. Clint Eastwood, 62 years old, won Best Director and Best Picture, the first Oscars of his career, after 40 years in Hollywood, after Leone and Siegel had been gone for 3 and 2 years, respectively. He dedicated his acceptance speech to them, the 2 men who were gone. And somewhere in the film itself, in the background of a Western cemetery, their names were still there in the dirt where he'd placed them. S. Leone, Donald Siegel. Clint never made another Western after Unforgiven. He said this was his last, a goodbye to the genre. And so the tombstones with Leone and Siegel's names became not just a tribute to 2 men, but a tombstone for the genre itself, the Western buried in the same ground as the men who made Clint's Westerns possible. The full weight of it didn't land in reviews. The tombstones didn't make headlines. Most people watching Unforgiven in 1992 had no idea those names were there. They found out slowly, over years, the way film secrets always come out. Someone pauses the film. Someone looks closely at the cemetery. Someone posts a screenshot. Someone says, "Wait, is that what I think it is?" Yes, it is exactly what you think it is. 2 names in stone, placed there by a man who learned everything from them, a man who waited until they were gone to make his final, perfect Western. A man who understood that you can't make a eulogy while the people you're eulogizing are still alive. You have to wait, let them die, grieve for them, and then make the film you couldn't have made without them, set in the world they helped you build, with their names carved quietly into the ground so that they're there in every frame, whether anyone notices or not.
Leone and Siegel were everywhere in Unforgiven. In the pacing Clint had learned from Siegel, fast, efficient, no wasted shots. In the operatic violence he'd absorbed from Leone, the confrontations stretched to breaking point, the silence before the shooting that felt longer than the shooting itself. In the moral complexity, the refusal of easy heroes, the understanding that violence destroys everyone it touches. They were in every frame, and they were in the dirt. S. Leone, Donald Siegel. In a film about guilt and memory and the things you carry from your past, Clint Eastwood carved the names of the men he carried with him into the landscape of his greatest work, hid them where only the closest viewers would find them, and said nothing about it for years. Not because he was hiding it, but because some tributes aren't meant to be announced. Some things you do because they're true, not because anyone is watching. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. Share it with someone who understands that the deepest tributes are the ones nobody asked for and nobody knew about. Have you ever done something for someone who was already gone? Something they'd never know about? Something you didn't tell anyone? Let us know in the comments, and ring that bell, because the best stories are always the ones hiding in the background, in the dirt, where most people never think to look.